screen, just give a thumbs up if you can. All right. Thank you. All right, so this is the first class, class 1. As you might already know, this is going to be covering Honors Algebra 2 on the high school level every week from 3:30 p.m. Eastern Seaboard Time to 4:30 p.m. Eastern Seaboard Time. And then, so just an overview of today's class, we're going to go over some introduction and logistics, and then going to cover linear equations and absolute values, and then solving inequalities, systems of equations, exponent laws, distance formula, midpoint formula, and then I'll just assign you guys homework. I think you all might have seen this, but I'll just go over the syllabus very quickly again. So this is the first day. We're gonna, as I said, review a lot of the Algebra 1 foundations, and then the next meeting we'll be talking about transformations and factoring quadratics, polynomials part 2, rational and radical functions, logs and their properties, functions, exponential functions and word problems, and then we'll end off with circles and matrices. So every week I'll be assigning you guys homework, and as you can see on meeting 6, about halfway through this class, I will assign you guys a project instead of homework for you guys to work on that week. All right. So for logistics, just weekly classes, homework will be assigned at the end of every class. Please submit your homework. I'll post an assignment, homework assignment on Google Classroom. So please just turn it in there. Usually I'll submit the homework in a Google Doc format. So please just kind of write your answers down on a piece of paper and take a photo of that and send it to me. Just make sure that everything is legible. I can read it, and I'll grade it and get it back to you before the next class. Stay muted unless called upon. Please participate. If you don't want to speak out, just type it in the chat box and I'll look at your answers. If you have any questions, raise your hand or message me privately in the chat and I'll get back to you. Turn in the homework on time, and then most importantly, to have fun. So first we're going to be talking about linear equations and absolute values. So linear equations are just these kind of equations that you see here. Right here, like -12 equals 6r. There is no private chat. Then just okay. I believe there is a private chat. Yeah. Just click on the little tab and it will be you can see who you want to message. So just please private message me, or you can just message it to the whole group if you feel comfortable with that. So now we're going to be talking about linear equations and absolute values. Linear equations, where you're going to be learning about linear equations throughout your entire math career in Algebra 2, pre-calc, AP courses. So it's very good to review all of the linear equations and all of that. So this is just an example. -12 equals 6r minus 3r. And then you would solve it by dividing both sides by 3, and then you would get -4 equals r. And then I don't know if you guys learned this before, but usually in Algebra 2, you want to write it in something called set notation. So you can see there are these little curly brackets here and you want to write it like that in curly bracket notation. You don't want to write it in right here. You don't want to write it in the common form of r equals 4. So you want to just write it in this kind of set notation when you're learning Algebra 2, when you're writing answers. My teacher, he accepted both ways, but it's usually generally better to write it in this set notation way. And then going on to some other things. So we have what these letters equal. So we have first n, the set of natural numbers, just any whole number greater than 0. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1,000, 1 million, 2 million. Z, this stands for the set of integers, which is any like -100, like includes 0, any whole numbers. So just any whole numbers is an integer. And then I, it stands for a set irrational numbers. So for example, pi, √3, e, all of those are irrational numbers, and that can be expressed as I. And then next you have Q, which is a set of rational numbers, which is just any number that can be expressed as a fraction, like 1. It can be expressed as 1/1, 1/5, 200/71, -14. All of those work as rational numbers. We will later get into irrational numbers later on in the course. Continuing on, we have R, which is just set of real numbers. This is probably the easiest one to remember. It covers all of the above. All right. And then next up, we have this little thing called that looks like an E, or an E with a slash. So you might see something like 1 E N. So that just means 1 is the set is a natural number, basically. This E means it is included in that set. But then the E with the slant, as you might imagine, it means it is not part of the set. So if you see something like that, 1 EN, it just means 1 is a set, is a part of the natural numbers. It is in that set. So that's just what it means. It's some notation. You'll get into Algebra 2. It will talk about that. It'll have on some papers, you might see that. So it's good to know what it means. There might also be questions that come up like, is 1, E, Q, is 1 a rational number? That's just what it would be asking. And then you would have to answer with yes or no. And just remember order of operations and negatives. All right. And then next up, here are some problems that I would like you guys to do. Once you finish the problems, just send the answers to me in the chat box. Let's take about 10 minutes to work on these problems. If any of you guys have any questions, please, you can either message me in the chat box, or you can just unmute and ask me directly, and I would be happy to answer your questions. Yep, for those of you guys who are, so I'll just give the answer for number one. So yes, n is equal to 1 for the first one. You would first, of course, multiply -7 into the 6n minus 1, and then you would combine, but you would combine the side and then move the ends to one side. You can put all the answers together. Once you've solved all 6, you can just send them all to me all at once if you would like. Okay. So about 10 minutes, I see a lot of answers in the chat box. Yes, so for number one, it would be n equals 1. And then the next one, it would be x equals -1. Next one would be r equals 8. And then for number 4, let me pull up the answers real quick. It would be, yes, v -1. And then the next one, for the absolute value, x equals 9 or -9. And then for the last one, v is equal to 27/4 or -9. Very good. And then just a reminder for when you're doing these kind of problems, you always want to put it in the fancy brackets. So for the last one, you would just write it as 27/4, comma, -9, and then end curly bracket. And then that would be your final answer for the last one. Yeah, just remember, yeah, to just get it. It's a good habit to get into, to put the curly brackets around it, so you do know, because that is the usual notation that people use in Algebra 2. Yeah, that it is that bracket. I can also just put it in the whole class. Yep, it is these fancy brackets that you would use for it. And then if there's 2 or 3 solutions or even more, just put commas in between. Usually you would want to put least to greatest, or sometimes if teachers like to put it great to least, but just have it in some kind of ascending or descending order, so it's easy to keep track of. Don't just throw numbers around like 1 and then -5 and then 20. So just keep it clear and have it in a good format. All right, so next up, we have solving inequalities. So an example is -2p minus 1 is less than 4 times p plus 1 minus 5p. Can you explain how you solve 5 or 6? I don't get the absolute value. Sure. So I'll quickly explain number 5. So first, when you solve for absolute values, we'll just let's take number 5 as an example. So first, when you have this absolute value, you want to you first want to divide both sides by -4 to get rid of the -4. So -4 divided by -6, 3/2. So that way you have that on one side. I'll type it out to make it more clear as well. So then you are left with x. So you are left with that, right? And then afterwards, you would have x divided by x, and then you would have to take away the brackets, right? So when you take away the brackets, the answer can be either negative or positive. So meaning that x divided by 6 is either equal to negative 3/2 or regular 3/2, because when it's an absolute value, it always turns value positive, but the number in it could also be negative, which is turned positive. So are you following? Yeah. And then afterwards, it's pretty simple. You just multiply 6 into it, and then you simplify and you get 9. Yep. So that's just how, no problem. That's just how you would usually solve for absolute value problems. All right. And then next one's just solving inequalities. So as I said, this was a problem, and you would solve it just -2p minus 1. You would put the 4 in, and you would get 4 is less than 4p plus 4 minus 5p. Afterwards, you would solve it, simplify the side. So you would have -p plus 4 on one side, and then you would simplify it even further, move plus 2p on either side, and then minus 4. So you would get -5 is less than p. And then that is how you put it on a number line. Whenever it is a greater than or less than, without the greater than or equal to symbol, you always put this little curvy line right here to denote that. And then in interval form, this is how you write it: -5, comma, infinity, since that is what p is. It is greater than, but not equal to -5, and it goes on all the way into infinity. Let me go back. And then for this, just for an example, if this was greater than or equal to, right? If you have this little squiggly line right here, this curved line would become the square bracket, like so, like the stapler bracket. That just means equal to in this case, right? And then on the number line, you would also have to make the change. So it is the square bracket instead of the curly brackets. So that's a very important differentiation to make. And always keep that in mind. Is it greater than or less than, or is it greater than or equal to, or less than or equal to, and that will greatly change the notation. So, and usually when you write an answer, you always want to put the final answer in interval form. You rarely have to write the answer like this: the -5 is greater than p. You would always, probably 99% of the time, you would put it in the interval form, -5, comma, infinity, with the curly brackets or square brackets. And then also, just kind of a technical thing, whenever you're using infinity, you always put the curve bracket. You never put the square bracket. And then just things to remember. Some of you remember flipping the inequality symbol when you're dividing by negative or multiplying. Differentiating between and or inequalities. So that's very important. That would greatly vary on how you graph it. And then also this thing, it's a U symbol, which means or. So you would read, for the bottom part, you would read that as -infinity, 0, and then or it is less than 0, or it is greater than 6. So that is read as an or symbol. So whenever you want to signify that it means or, you would always use that U symbol. So that's also something to keep in mind. All right. And then here are some practice problems for you guys to do. And then after, please, as I said, we'll probably take 5 minutes for this, for these problems. When you just send all the answers to me at once, and remember to use interval notation when you're sending the answers to me, as if it was a formal test or something. Don't use the greater than or less than symbols. Just use regular set notation. Mhm. Oh, and also, a few people ask me this: how do you type the infinity symbol? On MacBook, it would usually just be option. It would usually be option 5. I'm not sure how to do it on other softwares, but you can just Google it really quick. And then if you want to do the curly brackets, it would just be Shift 9 or 0. And then for the fancy, yeah. And then the other square brackets, you can also find it just looks like that. Do you guys need a bit more time for the problems? All right, we'll take about 2 to 3 more minutes, and then I'll just go over the problems. It's fine if you didn't finish them all. Just when it's 4 o'clock, just put in all the answers to the problems that you've done, and then we can just go over the ones that you guys didn't get to. All right, guys. If you could just please put all of the answers to the problems you've solved so far, just put them in the chat box. I'll take a look at them, and then we can just go over the other ones that you guys did not get to. All right. So I think most of the answers are in. Again, to type the infinity symbol on MacBook, it is option 5. Also, if you're not using a MacBook, you can Google the answer. I think there's probably a lot of answers on how to do the infinity symbol, so that's no problem. So yep, for the first one, it is 4, infinity. For number 2, we have negative infinity, 0, comma 0, and u. Infinity. That is the answer to number 2 right there. Remember, the U symbol just means or, so to just always keep in mind to use that U symbol. And then for number 3, we would have the square brackets, negative 8, 34 over 5. So the answer to number 3 would be negative 8, 34 over 5. Good job to you guys who remember to use the square brackets. And then number 4. Number 4's answer would just be the exact same as number 2, negative infinity, 0. And then u6, infinity, it would be the exact same thing. And then for number 5, the last one, the answer would be negative 7 over 5. Yeah, and that would be the final answer. Okay. Okay. So just to clarify again, for whenever you use the square brackets, I'll type it in the chat again. These things, the square brackets, are when you are dealing with inequalities that are greater than or greater than and equal to, or less than or equal to symbols. That is when you use square brackets. And then when it is just greater than or less than, you use the curly brackets. So that's the big differentiating factor between the two of them. So number 2 has a typo. Let me double check. For oh yeah, I mistyped. Sorry about that. That should be 12x minus 4. Let me exit out real quick. I'll fix that. 12x minus 4. Sorry about that, guys. Yep. And then okay, number 3, how you would solve number 3. Let me see. Okay, so for that one, you would first, of course, move the 5 onto the other side. So you would get, you would minus 5, of course. So you would get right there, you would get absolute value of negative 6x minus 10. Negative 6 minus 10x is less than or equal to 74, right? And then afterwards, you would remove the absolute value brackets. So you would get negative 6 minus 10x is less than or equal to 79. And then here's where it gets tricky. When you're dealing with absolute values, right, you have one positive value and the other one becomes negative. So when you flip it, so instead 79, right, it turns into negative 79. You have to flip the symbol. So you have negative 6 minus 10x is greater than or equal to negative 74. And then you would solve it. You would solve it that way. What do the normal parentheses just mean greater than or less than. So I'll just write it. I'll draw it out again. So when you're doing greater than or less than, you use curly brackets. And then when you're doing less than or equal to, or greater than or equal to, you use the square brackets. So that's just that's how you differentiate between them. So when they ask you to write the answer in interval notation, that's just how you would write it. You would write it if it was greater than or equal to, just regularly. Greater than or less than, no equal to, you would just put the brackets like that, like regular. And then if it was less than or equal to, or greater than or equal to, you would put the square brackets. No, the curly, okay. And then for any bit of confusion, the curly brackets, right? That is for just regular writing out answers when you're solving like an equation, say like R is equal to 4, right? That's when you would use the regular curly brackets. So the regular, these fancy curly brackets aren't for inequalities. Those are for regular answers like R equals 4, X equals 0, that kind of stuff. You put that in the curly brackets. But when you're dealing with inequalities, you would always use these kind of brackets. All right. Does anyone have any other questions about this or regarding the previous slides? All right, no questions. All right, let's move on to the next slide. So next is systems of equations. This is something that will be talked a lot about in Algebra 2, and as well as graphing. In Algebra 2, there is a lot of graphing to be done. So for systems of equations, obviously right here, we have the equations of two lines, y equals -2/3x plus 3, and then y equals x minus 2, right? So you can solve this in a few different ways, but the first way is you solve by graphing. So first, you would graph the first line, right? This one, which you would do. So since the 3, the line intersects the y-axis at 3, and it goes down 2/3, and then continues like that. Let me just complete the line. There we go. And then the next one, y equals -2, starts out at -2, and then it would work its way up 1/2, up 1/1. And then as you can see here, we have a very clear point of intersection right here in the middle where the two lines intersect. So if you were to graph it, the point of intersection would be the answer. So in this case, the answer would be 3, 1. And then usually when you write, and then you would write it as if you were, writing any point, just 3, 1 would be, the 3, 1 would be the answer. The other way you can do this is, of course, through substitution, which is the method I would prefer. But when you're learning this, you will be required to use both graphing to solve it by graphing and by just regular substitution. And then when you are graphing, and then substitution, right? You can pretty easily substitute. So you can substitute y for x or x for y. So in this case, y equals x minus 2. You just plug that in to the other side of the equation. So you have x minus 2 is equal to -2/3x plus -2/3x plus 3. So that is the way you can pretty easily determine which side what to use. All right, and then next. All right, and then take your time and do these problems. Let's take about 10 minutes. For these problems, please try to, if you have graph paper, great, then you can practice graphing. If you don't, just draw a graph and x and y axes, and then try to solve 2 of these equations by graphing, and then the rest you can do whichever way you want. You can either use substitution, or you can just do regular graphing. So either of those works. It depends on your preference, but please try to do at least 2 problems with graphing just to kind of see how it works and get a feel for it. Oh yeah, and then of course, after you solve them, just send them to me in the messages box. If you do think the answer is no solution, you can just put empty curly brackets. So for example, if for one of the problems it was no solution, just write that as your answer. All right, let's take about 5 more minutes-ish, and then around 4:20, just put whatever answers you have in the chat box. It's fine if you didn't finish, and then we'll just go over all the questions. All right. If you guys haven't finished, it's fine. Just put all of you got. Just put your answers in the chat box. If you haven't already, I'll take a look at them, and then I'll start going over the answers. All right. So for number 1, 2, -3, make sure to always write it in this kind of formula, as if you're talking about a point. So always make sure to write the answer in that notation with the brackets. Number 2, 1, 0. Number 3, -1, 1. Number 4, no solution. So you would just put double empty curly brackets. Make sure that they are the fancy curly brackets, not the regular brackets. For number 5, no solution as well. And then last one, the answer is 3, 1. All right. Does anyone have any questions about how I got those answers? All right. It seems that there are no questions. Again, if you have any questions midway through, just put them in the chat box and I'll try to we'll get back to you. Okay, so next, after this, we have exponent laws. And then here are all of the exponent laws that you will need to know for Algebra 2. I think most of you might have already learned about these in Algebra 1, but just a quick refresher, a to the x times a to the y is a to the x plus y. A to the x divided by a to the y is a to the x minus y. A to the x to the y power is a times a to the x times y. And then a times b to the x is ax times bx. A divided by b to the x power is a to the x divided by b to the x. A to the 0 equals 1. A to the negative x is 1 over a to the x, so you flip it around. And then last one, a to the x over y is equal to the y root of a to the x. So those are just some things. Those are all the rules for you guys to keep in mind when solving these kind of problems. And then here is an example. So we have this kind of nasty looking equation right here with 3 to the x minus 2 times x to -3 divided by 2x to the -1, all to the -3rd power. But first, as you know, by the negative exponent rule, you can see that whenever it is the negative exponent, you flip it around. You flip it to the other side of the fraction. So that is something that definitely keep in mind. So in this case, the x to the -1, it goes up to the top, and it is x. And also remember, very important, that it is x to the -1, not 2x to the -1. The -1 is only incorporated into the x, so that's very important. And then these two, you can just multiply them together. You would get x to the -5th, and then you can move that to the bottom, where you have x to the 5th power. So when you see these negatives, don't freak out. Just move the negatives to the other half of the fraction below the above the bar. And then you are left with this equation, 3x divided by 2x to the 5th, all to the power of -3, so not as bad as before. And then you can you simplify, of course. So you are left with and then when you see this negative fraction outside, right? You flip the whole equation upside down. So 2x to the 5th, which was originally the bottom, the denominator becomes numerator, comes on top, and this one comes down to the bottom. And of course, you just regular exponent laws, just regular to the power of 3, put everything to the power of 3. So you get 2 to the power of 3 is 8, x to the 5th to the power of 3, x to the 15th, divided by 27, x to the 3rd. And then you would just simplify, and you would get x to the 12th, 8x to the 12th divided by 27. So that would be how you simplify the this exponent. All right. Any questions about the exponent laws and how to use them? All right, no questions. And all right. So since we are a bit short on time, I'll just try to work on number 1 and number 2. We'll take probably the last 4 minutes of class to work on those, and then you can just send me the answers of them once you finish, or if you only finish one, just send me the answers to the one you solved. That's completely fine. So yeah, just take the last few minutes of class to work on numbers 1 and 2. All right, I'll quickly just go over these 2 problems. It's fine if you didn't finish. So for number 1, the answer is 2. And for the second one, the answer is 1 over j cubed. Does anyone have any questions about those 2 answers? All right, since I don't see any questions, yeah, I will keep moving along. All right, and then we don't have enough time for this, but just quickly reviewing what the midpoint and distance formula is. Distance is x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared, all square rooted. That's the distance formula. And then the midpoint formula, the midpoint of it is x comma y is equal to x1 plus x2 divided by 2, and then comma y1 plus y2 divided by 2. And then, so for the first one, those are just what the equivalent values are. And then you would just plug it in and then solve that.